Hello friend, this is me, your host. Welcome back to our channel. I hope you all are well and doing great. So today I'm back with another video to give a review on another book which is e- a Echoes of the Heart, a memoir of love, loss and healing. This book is by Dr. Muhammad Naveed Akbar. So let's see what we have in this book. Welcome to the Echoes of the Heart, a journey into the depths of healing, resilience, and transformation. This book invites you to step into a story that is at once deeply personal and profoundly universal. Through the life of Aisha, you will explore the intimate struggles and triumphs that define what it means to be human, the dance between pain and hope, loss and renewal, fear and courage. The path that unfolds within these pages reflects the winding, sometimes difficult road that many of us walk. It acknowledges the shadows that can weigh heavily on our hearts, as well as the light that can emerge when we lean into vulnerability and connection. This narrative is a testament to the power of the human spirit to heal, grow, and thrive, even in the face of profound challenges. This book is grounded in the belief that stories have the power to heal and connect us. By sharing Aisha's journey, I have I hope to create a space where readers feel seen, understood, and inspired. The themes of hope, forgiveness, authenticity, and community echo throughout, reminding us that while our individual paths are unique, our human experiences are deeply intertwined. Echoes of the Heart is not just a story to be read, but a journey to be lived. It challenges you to listen closely to the whispers of your own heart, to embrace your imperfections, and to find courage in vulnerability. It encourages a mindful presence that honors every step of the journey, no matter how small. Chapter 1, Journey begins. The start of all journeys is marked by questions with no quick answers. For Aisha, leaving behind the only world she had ever known was not only a physical movement, but it was also an emotional, spiritual, and deeply transmogrifying one. She wasn't pursuing a dream so much as fleeing a silence that had become altogether too loud back home. Each goodbye she spoke, each move away from what was known, tugged at the deepest root of her very existence. And yet, within herself, something demanded she must go. That yearning, that strange and subtle pain, whispered to her that she would never grow if she did not take the risk and leave. This chapter is the tale of the initial step, the shaking yet resolute step into the unknown. A farewell without closure. The last morning at home came in quietly, not with the cinematic, romantic wistfulness of a goodbye scene from a film, but with the quiet activity of a family at a loss as to how to let go. Aisha's bag was standing by the door, packed and ready, a reminder of the permanence of this parting. Her mother circulated the kitchen with the practiced ease as if nothing were altered, even though her eyes betrayed the sorrow that could not voice. Her father sat on the porch, a newspaper folded across his lap, unopened. Even Omar, normally noisy and opinionated, was silent that morning. Aisha felt that if one of them told the truth, the dam would burst and they would all be unable to check the tide of feeling. She stood for a very long time in the middle of her room, tracing the tops of old trinkets on the shelf, dusty photographs and books with greased edges. Each of them seemed like a fragment of her soul. Her heart welled up with the burden of what she was abandoning, memories that clung to the walls, lullabies sung at night, and the smell of her mother's perfume that still lingered on her clothes. Why could she leave behind a world so deeply as her own? Yet one that had begun to feel like a cage. The paradox was cruel and biting. She loved this place, but it did not love her dreams. When the time arrived to leave, she was shaking. She clasped her mother firmly, inhaling her warmth as a balm that she might never know again. Her father gave a nod, but his eyes were a whirlwind of pride and hurt. And then Omar, who gave her a crumpled piece of paper with trembling hands. "Open it later," he told her. She put it in the pocket of her coat, not able to trust herself to say anything. As she got into the taxi, she knew there would never be enough time, never words enough, never a farewell that wasn't painful. The, the ride to the airport was one of silence. The taxi's engine hummed beneath a collective grief. Aisha stared out the window, watching the scenery blur into memory. Every tree, every building, every familiar turn in the road felt like a farewell. Her mother reached for her hand briefly, squeezing it tight before pulling away. It was the kind of gesture that carried years of unspoken love. Aisha wanted selfishly for someone to tell her to stop telling her they needed her, to tell her to remain. But no one did, because everybody knew that this was something she had to do. In that stillness, the unraveling started for Aisha. The threads that had bound her to this location, familiarity, duty, love, started to disintegrate. She wasn't prepared, but maybe she never would be. Some travels don't wait for preparation, they require only courage. And although she bore the ache of leaving, something inside her told her that growth regularly started with breaking. Her final view of home was the rearview mirror, her mother's silhouette disappearing in the distance, her house dwindling to the horizon. A burning sensation in her eyes, but she did not avert her gaze. She wanted to recall this, all the details, all the sounds, all the smells, because though she walked into the unknown, she knew the tale of her heart would always start here. The burden of a single suitcase. Within the tiny dented suitcase she hugged, Aisha had crammed more than she had clothes and essentials. She had packed fear, expectation, fragments of herself, and shreds of memory. The suitcase due to wasn't heavy due to what it represented, the condensation of entire life into a few items. What do you pack if you are leaving everything behind? What did you leave behind if you couldn't take everything? These were questions she had grappled with for days, and none of the answers had seemed quite right. Every object had been chosen with measured consideration. A creased photograph of her parents, a scarf that her grandmother's that made a small notebook full of poems that she never published. Every object was a charm, a reminder of what she had been, and yet she knew all these things couldn't possibly encompass the reality of what she was leaving behind. The actual memories, the sound of her mother making duas at night, the call to prayer in the morning, the silence of being a monk, what was familiar could never be stuffed or stored. As she snapped the bag shut, it gave a final, decisive sound that stuck in her head, a closure, a boundary, an assurance that the door behind her was going to shut, perhaps forever. She sat next to it for hours, tracing her fingers over the materials, questioning whether her future would be worth the past she was going to leave behind. Her heart beat with an unnamed fear, not fear of what she didn't know, but fear she would lose the girl she used to be. Lugging the suitcase was a test of patience. It thudded against her knees as she moved, trailed after her like a sullen friend. At the airport, waiting in line, she observed other passengers with smooth bags and cases ashore. They had a sense of destination, of identity. Aisha, on the other hand, felt like a vagabond without a guide. Her suitcase was not merely a vessel, it was a reflection of her confusion. There was a moment as she paused just short of the check-in desk when she thought she might turn around, but she thought back on nights of suffocation, on dreams too large for her small town, on silence she had grown accustomed to wearing as a second skin. That suitcase was full of what had brought her here before, but she had come here for herself and for tomorrow. The weight was not oppressive, it was a reminder that she had something worth carrying. When she finally put it on the scale and watched it go down the conveyor belt, a weird emptiness washed over her. Her hands were exposed, her chest empty, yet she also felt oddly liberated. This suitcase was no longer hers to burden. Now she burdened only herself. Her fears, her courage, and the determination to move ahead. The airport of uncertain goodbyes. The airport was a place mid-air between worlds, a liminal space where individuals waited for new beginnings or grieved the closing of chapters. For Aisha, it was both. The terminal hummed with noise, flight announcements, suitcases rolling, footsteps resonating across polished floors. She stood in the midst of movements like a single island, her heart thumping against the cage of her ribs. The farewell outside the car had been short, but its rings sounded, its sound of her like a cathedral bell tolling. Walking to security and checking in her bag, she felt an odd sense of detachment, as if she was observing herself in a film. The girl ahead of her was hers, and yet she was someone else, someone unwinding the threads of her former self to weave a new self in the unfamiliar. Each step she took along, the concourse was heavy. Individuals brushed past her with an ease she coveted. Parents with strollers, couple walking arm in arm, business people buried in their phones. She coveted their sureness, their seeming fixity. Aisha, however, had a thousand questions in her eyes. She saw how children held on to mothers, and her heart yearned with desire. She thought of her own mother's last hug, the way it contained more than arms. It contained centuries of custom, years of renunciation, and a love that never asked for anything but gave everything. By the time she arrived at the security gate, the quick rolled along, as if time itself struggled to let her have second thoughts. She gripped her boarding pass close, having the feeling it was a lock and a key. The document examiner presented her with a professional note, but Aisha perceived nothing of the tempest in her head. How could they understand that she was not only leaving land but a piece of herself? How could they possibly assume that she was moving towards something without the promise of reaching it? Beyond security, everything was different. The terminal unfolded like a glass cathedral. Sunlight streaming through large windows, planes visible in the distance. She settled into a chair by the gate and sat down hard, hands crossed and cold. Families around her talked, travelers read, and flight attendants walked purposefully past. Her thoughts ran wildly in possible future, possible failures, unfamiliar faces, and faraway cities. She considered calling home one last time, but dreaded hearing the sadness in her mother's voice. There was some farewells better left unsaid. When boarding was called, she gasped. The time had come, and she was completely unprepared. She floored with the hurt, legs shaking, heart pounding. The line to the gate was a corridor to change. Every step was a shout that she wasn't turning around. Not ever. She did not know whether others, too, had experienced this strange mix of hope and loss, as if joy and sadness dwelled together in the same breath. Boarding the plane, she turned back once more, not for her family, but for the life that had brought her to the place. The woman she once was would never be the same again. She was not running away. She was growing up, and even as her eyes were brimming with tears, her back was straight. She was part of a new narrative now, and the pages were just being opened. The quietness of the unseen flight. As the aircraft climbed higher into the clouds, Aisha was enveloped in a quiet that extended past the sound of engines. Sitting in the window seat, she looked out on a world She looked out onto a world rapidly disappearing beneath her. Cities condensed into grids, rivers uncoiled like veins of silver, and all she knew started to dissolve into abstraction. The cabin of the plane was a silent symphony of creaking magazines. The random beep of a seatbelt light and the soft vibration of passengers dozing or daydreaming. But within her a whirlwind was occurring, a river of unspoken regrets, what ifs, and shaky hopes. She leaned her forehead against the chill of the window, allowing the frost to calm the place with her mind. Her reflection gazed back at her, weary, questioning, seeking. She shut her eyes and attempted to envision what lay before her. A city of strangers, a room she had never encountered, an occupation she had not yet discovered, and a part of herself she wasn't familiar with. The future opened before her like a darkened corridor, its door closed, its lights extinguished. For a person who had grown up with predictability around them, this was frightening. But she made her decision, and now she was flying, both literally and figuratively. The in flight meal arrived and departed untouched. Aisha's stomach was too tense with anxiety to eat. She left the tray in front of her out of courtesy, nibbling at the bread roll to keep herself occupied. The old woman sitting next to her questioned if she was okay, and Aisha smiled too convincingly to be real. She didn't dare speak. If she began to tell her, she would sob. And if she sobbed, she feared she wouldn't be able to stop. So she remained quiet, mouthing prayers under her breath. Asian phrases learned from generations past that now came to be her sole point of reference. The time dragged on in a haze. She attempted to sleep, but sleep refused to come. Her thoughts bounded from one situation to another. What if her lodging was unsafe? What if she couldn't what if she couldn't speak? What if the isolation consumed her entirely? She imagined herself wandering down strange streets, attempting to read signs, attempting to smile at strangers, attempting to fit in, when every fiber she had unfolded the paper. Omar handed her at the door once. It was a note scribbled hastily. "You will always be my sister, no matter how far you fly, nothing else." But it was enough to shatter something within her. She covered her face. She covered her face to stifle the sob that threatened to erupt, and tears dripped down her face, falling like repentance. The stranger sitting next to her handed her a tissue, silently exuding compassion. Aisha took it gracefully, acknowledging the way niceness can flower even in silence. By the time the plane started its descent, she felt like a different person, vulnerable but alert, afraid but still alive. As city lights appeared in the distance, glittering threads of life amidst blackness below, Aisha muttered to herself, "Let this be the start." The wheels alighted and the world leaned forward, as if promoting her to move further. And so she walked into the unknown, not that she had none to offer, but because she had dared to imagine beyond it. Memories pressed against the glass window. Sitting in the terminal of her new city, waiting for the shuttle to her temporary residence, Aisha sat gazing out into the world outside the heavy glass windows. The alien skyline reached out across the horizon, sprinkled with architecture that was strange to her and colors that seemed bleaker than those she left behind. It wasn't the city that was different, it was the air around it. There was a grayness in the air, not oppressive, but persistent, as if reminding her she was far from the sun-heated bricks and jasmine-scented nights of her native land. Her image superimposed itself softly over the scene outside, where in the mix of picture and truth she saw spectres. The face of her mother to beckoning her to supper, the manner in which Omar rested against the kitchen door, feigning indifference when he obviously cared. Her father's silent, observant affection. She could almost hear the adhan from the local mosque, taste the sweetness of dates and tea, but those were things of the past, stuck to the glass like faded photographs out of reach but stubborn. The past clung to her not as nostalgia but as self. It was who she was, and now it would be the portion of her that no one in this new world could perceive unless she decided to make it visible. She had always thought that memories would be reassuring, a reassuring hand to hold on to during cold times. But now they were bittersweet. They weren't anchors, they were shadows. She didn't wish to forget, but remembering so intensely made her hurt. Would she begin to forget the sound of her mother's laugh curving upward at the end like a question? Would Umar's voice be more difficult to remember? These were the things that frightened her more than the size of the city or its tongue. Losing home was not only about maps, it was about memory loss, about the slow wear away of what defines you. Even so, she held on to those mental pictures. They were the only baggage she had left, the only items customs wouldn't be able to scan or interrogate. She played them like a familiar tune, even at the cost of tears, for to lose them would be a second living, and she wasn't prepared for it. Finally, the shuttle came, and Aisha grabbed her bag. Striding over towards it, she glanced once again at the sight behind the glass. The city lingered, uncaring and unresponsive. Yet Aisha proceeded regardless, muttering a secret woe to the image behind her. I won't forget, and I will become someone worth remembering. City of strange sounds and faces. The instant Aisha emerged into the streets of the city, the cacophony swirled over her like a tide. Horns honked not in wrath, but as a rhythm of living. Voices chatted in tongues she hardly understood, their rhythm swift, snappy, impatient. Peddlers called out bargains, laughter erupted suddenly from sidewalk cafes, and the wail of a siren in the distance sliced through the din like a knife. It was a symphony of unfamiliarity, one she wasn't yet proficient in. She navigated it cautiously, as if each note was a new word, in a tongue she hadn't yet mastered, but was eager to speak. The faces around her were a mosaic of difference. People of all colors and gait moved with intent. They had a destination. They were home. Aisha, on the other hand, was pervaded by the anonymity. No one looked at her. No one smiled. She felt invisible and exposed at the same time, hidden in the ground, but perpetually cognizant of being different. Her hijab, accent, and tentative step, everything made her feel like a walking question mark. She stamped to walk as fast as them, but soon realized it wasn't all about faster strides. It was about walking with purpose. She had done every turn of the corner was a decision made with doubt. Even the maps on her phone taunted her with their unforgiving clarity, so sure in lines and names that were meaningless to her heart. She followed them anyway, hoping that they would somehow take her to something that felt at least vaguely familiar. Crossing the road was a challenge in itself. The traffic lights changed too fast. The motorist hardly stopped. She held on to her purse tightly to her body and muttered prayers to herself, praying every time she crossed safely. Her body was high alert, tight, always watching for signals and signs. Was this to be every day? A constant fight to decipher the unwritten laws of a foreign country. But even the chaos had its beauty. A child giggles as she rounded pigeons in a plaza. A pair dancing to an unheard rhythm on the corner of a deserted street. A pair dancing to an unheard rhythm on the corner of a deserted street. A mural of rainbow hues splashed on a drab wall by a street artist. Aisha hesitated to observe, captivated by the difference between their bravado and her reserve. She knew that the city wasn't cruel, it was merely foreign, and forgiveness, though terrifying, was full of promise. She continued on, the noise still high, the faces still unrecognizable. Yet a tiny flame of curiosity was kindled within. This city would not know her today, but it might know her one day. Seeking refuge in a foreign country. The tiny apartment complex was on the corner of a narrow alleyway, its bricks worn by years, its face more utilitarian than inviting. Rain and far away exhaust lingered in the air and the stairs groaned as Aisha climbed up with her suitcase bumping along behind her. Her third floor room was bare, boxy and strangely sterile, with chipped paint and old fixtures. The keys clicked in her hand as she entered what was now, at least for the time being, her home. It didn't smell like anything that, above all, unsettled her. A home should smell of spice, incense, warmth. This smelled of nothing. She walked slowly through the space, touching surfaces as if that might awaken something familiar. The bed was little more than a mattress on a frame covered in a thin sheet that barely masked the coldness beneath. A single window overlooked an alley where voices echoed, and footsteps passed but never stayed. The loneliness wasn't just in the room, it seeped into her bones. She perched on the bed, her suitcase still closed next to her, with silence enveloping her shoulders like a shawl she had not requested. She unzipped her suitcase obediently, bringing out the little framed picture of her family and putting it on the window sill. It was the sole warmth she possessed. She did not weep, not yet. Her tears were a luxury she could not afford. She had to adjust, hard to survive. Her nature cautioned her not to feel too much, but that command was difficult to obey when every corner of the apartment reminded her she was alone in a city that did not know her name, her story. Later, hunger pushed her out. She roamed the adjacent streets until she spotted a corner store, purchasing bread and a can of soap. She could only sort of read the label on. The shopkeeper bestowed upon her a bland look, neither friendly nor friendly. She considered this a victory in her room. The soup had the flavor of metal and water, but she sat down to eat in silence, looking at the photo as if it somehow might bring comfort. The room was not unsafe, but it was not safe either. Not in the manner that a space becomes when it holds your story. Yet it was hers, and she said it to herself again and again. This is mine now. Not always, but for a while she would find ways to sleep here, to think about here, to create something. From the emptiness of these walls, her journey had to begin somewhere, and tonight it began on a mattress under a ceiling she didn't know. The first night of loneliness, the night descended quicker than she anticipated. The city outside the window changed into a still, quiet, faraway engines. Gentle footsteps and the occasional barking of a dog. Aisha lay punched up on the narrow mattress, covered with the single blanket she had bought, gazing at the ceiling with eyes that would not shut. The quiet here was more resonant than any sound she had ever heard. It wasn't only the lack of noise, it was the lack of space. Every corner of the room was a strange skin she had yet to get used to wearing. She scrolled through her phone, past messages she was too afraid to respond to, through pictures that seemed to be someone else's. At home, her nights were filled with laughter spilling from the neighbor's balcony, the scraping of dishes after dinner, the voice of her mother calling out tomorrow's reminders. Here there was none of that, only the sound of her own breathing and the rustle of clothing whenever she moved. Time elongated, minutes became hours, seemed seemed to elude her like a shadow that she could never grasp. She even thought about calling home for a moment, but she couldn't quite do it. What would she say? She arrived safely, that she missed them more than she ever imagined, that this new start was more like an end. She wasn't ready to acknowledge any of that, not to them, and not even to herself. Instead, she gripped the little framed picture of her family and held it against her heart as if that could ease the empty ache within her. She thought of Omar's note once more: "You will always be my sister, no matter how far you fly." It resonated within her, not as reassurance, but as inquiry. Was she flying or falling? Was this expansion or abandonment? She had no idea. All she knew was that she had never felt more adrift. There was no strategy beyond more survival, no follow-up moves beyond tomorrow. And in the darkness, doubt started seeping in like a cold wind through an open window. When sleep eventually arrived, it was faithful. Her dreams were littered with doors that refused to open, streets that did not go anywhere, voices she could not hear. She awoke more exhausted than when she had lain down. But morning had arrived, and with it a new day that in itself was something. She sat up slowly, the photograph still clutched in her hands, and breathed softly to the rising sun, one day at a time. This is all we have from this book. I hope you guys liked it. I'll be back with another video with another book. Till then, just take care and goodbye.